Negotiations with Minister Lavrov have planned. They will talk about regional issues with stress on the situation in Syria, Lebanon, and other regional issues. On May 27th, Minister Lavrov will meet with the Executive Secretary of CTBTO Preparatory Commission, Robert Floyd. This meeting will help discuss the wide range of issues in the agenda of relations between the Russian Federation and the CTBTO Preparatory Commission. Robert Floyd will be in Russia from May 24th through 28th. He is scheduled to participate in the opening of training courses for the Russian-speaking operators of wave farmers of the International Monetary System provided by the CTBTO. On May 28th, in Moscow, Minister Lavrov will participate in the work of the 13th international meeting of high representatives in charge of security, and will give a speech at the plenary session titled "The Emergence of the Architecture of Equal and Indivisible Security: Challenges and Possibilities for the States of Global South and East." On May 29th, in the city of Perm, Minister Lavrov will participate in international public and political hearings dedicated to the initiative put forward by President Putin about shaping the equal and indivisible security and cooperation in Eurasia. The event will bring together top political and public figures, diplomats, business representatives from dozens of countries. The same day, the Perm will host an off-site meeting of the Commission of the General Council of the United Russia Party. The topic of the meeting will be cooperation, facilitation to development of foreign ties of entities of the Russian Federation, including with the use of inter-party, parliamentary, and people's diplomacy. Let's move to the relevant international agenda to the situation around Ukraine. Vladimir Putin put forward an initiative without delay or preconditions to renew on May 15th in Istanbul direct bilateral negotiations about peace suspended by Kiev in the spring of 2022. The Kiev regime, as you remember, responded in the hysteric manner characteristic of it, by pursuing harmful for their own people policy to prevent a long-lasting and durable peace and making a political performance. Zelensky continued to make accusations devoid of diplomatic ethics against the leadership of our country and the Russian delegation. At the same time, the head of the Kiev regime could not make up his mind for a long time about the participation of Ukraine in this negotiation proposed by the Russian president. He consulted his European curators, and they who wanted to prevent the direct dialogue, but they couldn't make it. The only thing that they managed to do, they attempted to put psychological pressure on the Russian delegation that, as President Putin said, on May 15, arrived to Istanbul and was preparing to the meeting with the Ukrainian representatives. The presidential office thought in a naive way that postponing negotiations could make people refuse holding them at all, but they failed. Again, they had to appoint their delegates and on May 16th send them to negotiations with Russia. Why they needed it, but the answer is clear. Those are death pains of his career as an actor. The outcomes of these almost 2-hour negotiations are well known. Medinsky, aide to the president of the Russian Federation, talked about them. We achieved important negotiations, agreements on the largest of the 3 years exchange of POWs, 1,000 for 1,000, and written proposals for a future ceasefire. The prospect for a Russian-Ukrainian summit was outlined. I won't repeat the commentary of the Russian representatives who in great detail talked about the outcomes of the meeting in Istanbul. I would like to underline one more time because we received a lot of questions. It was Russia's initiative put forward by the leaders of the Russian delegations about the exchange of POWs. No one should attempt to ascribe this to themselves. It's Russia's initiative. Yesterday, on May 19th, a long telephone call between President Putin and his American counterpart Donald Trump took place. Leaders of Russia and the US had an honest exchange of opinions about the current situation around Ukraine and ways to find a political solution to the conflict. Given the discussions in Istanbul, the Russian side yet again outlined the aspiration to achieve an ultimate just settlement of the crisis. Moscow will propose Kyiv to work out a memorandum about a future peace treaty. In the process, it should be understood that it is impossible to reach this aim without removing the root causes of the crisis. We are yet to agree on a lot of details and articulate principles of the settlement. To set the time frame, as we said many times, Russia never refused to hold negotiations. It is prepared to continue the contacts with the Ukrainian side on the above-mentioned issues. This approach was fully understood by President Trump. Now it's up to Kyiv. They are about to have an important moment to make a decision, given those historical and controversial steps that we saw in the recent days and in the time before that. And the statements of Zelensky about aspiration to peace should be translated into real actions and steps. We don't expect any common sense in the presidential office, but we can hope that the remains the idea of the statehood will prevail and it will help them have a constructive stance. However, about after the negotiations, Zelensky and his European comrades supported strengthening Russian sanctions. We heard the same old story that Russia is not to be trusted, and they, as we were told, should be punished for not complying with an ultimatum about a 30-day ceasefire that Kyiv and its patrons wanted to present as a step to settlement. But they have to memorize or probably to put down this idea. Russia never agrees to ultimatums. We talked about it many times. I mean, the Russian leadership, first of all, and the Russian people said it too.
At the same time, what we're hearing from the West, this formula, this so-called formula, and it's yet another one. Of course, they're trying to come up with a formula like some alchemists, on the conditions of war does not stand up to criticism. We've all been there before, and it is obvious that achieving peace through these Western European means by ultra-liberals is not their goal. They pursue a different goal to provide the Ukrainian armed forces with a respite at any cost in order to restore its military potential and continue the confrontation with Russia. And it's exactly what they're openly speaking about. And the crimes of the Kyiv regime continue. This is back to the issue of how during the war conditions it's impossible to hold negotiations. But who is exactly prolonging this war? Who is committing daily crimes against the civilians? They need to remember this in Paris, in Berlin, in London, in the collective Brussels. And I will help them keep that in their memories. On May 14, the Ukraine Nazis launched a drone strike on the administration of the town of Kamenko-Dnipropetrovsk in the Zaporozhye region, injuring 2 employees. On the 9th of May 15th, militants attacked the city of Melitopol 13 times with UAVs. All drones were shut down by air defense, but due to the detonation of one of them, a civilian was killed in a Kimovka settlement. On May 15th, 3 civilians were wounded as a result of an attack by enemy kamikaze drones on the village of Kamensky Hutor in the Bryansk region. On May 15th, the Ukraine Nazis launched targeted missile strikes on the Church of the Protection of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the hospital in the village of Totkina, Kursk region. As a result, the church was burned from the inside and the hospital building was destroyed. Since May 15th, dozens of daily attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces on populated areas and civilian vehicles in Belgorod region have killed 3 residents and wounded at least 14. In the DPR, during that time, at least 6 people fell victim to shelling and UAV raids during this period. 1 civilian was killed, 4 civilians were killed, and 4 were injured in settlements of Kherson region. Apartment buildings and other civilian objects were damaged. On the 9th of May 15th, as a result of an attack by enemy drones in the village of Shangar, a modern medical outpatient clinic serving 2,000 people, including 250 children, was completely burned down. So who is exactly continuing this fight? Perhaps there will be some common sense and clear minds in France and the Western Europe who will finally put a name to those who are perpetrating these crimes. This is the fault of the crime who is sponsoring the Kyiv regime. It's their arms, it's their financing that is used against the civilians, civilian infrastructure. And these are targeted attacks. But for all that comes punishment. And it's not postponed, but it's happening based on the legal basis, on the work of law enforcement agencies right now. Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis and mercenaries for their war and other crimes. Oksana Shevchenko, who was detained by Russian law enforcement in 2024, has been sentenced to 10 years in prison. On the assignment of the SBU, she participated in the preparation of an assassination attempt on the head of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, in 2023-2024 with the help of a radio-controlled explosive device. Mihail Dmitrashvili, Alexei Pichkelauri, and Torniki Gagaudze from Georgia, as well as Hector Joel Urbano Pedroma from Colombia, who fought in the Ukrainian armed forces, were sentenced to 14 years in absentia. And all these so-called legionnaires are on an international wanted list. Anton Frolkin and Andrei Shulgan, Ukrainian armed forces fighters detained earlier by Russian servicemen, were sentenced to 15 years in prison. Viktor Kirpichenko, Alexander Primachuk, Denis Pisachenko, Sergei Shapoval, Anton Borymsky, and Dmitry Yeremov, who blocked settlements in Kursk region and prevented the evacuation of civilians, were sentenced to 16 years in prison. It was established that Frolkin, Shulgan, Kirpichenko, Shapoval, Borymsky, and Yeremov repeatedly opened fire on civilians who tried to flee. They opened fire to eliminate them. The investigation into the mass murder of civilians by Ukrainian neo-bandits in the village of Ruska Porechny in Rusk region continues. At the moment, it has been established that 24 people were killed in this village. And some of them had been tortured before death. Now on the new or same old insinuations of the Kiev regime. The Kiev regime does not abandon its attempt to form a parallel reality in which the Russian Crimea is presented as occupied and in need of liberation. In his May 18th address on the occasion of the 81st anniversary of the deportation of Crimean Tatars from Crimea, Zelensky once again did not refrain from his usual line of rhetoric, drawing ridiculous parallels between the tragic events of 1944 and the Russian Spring in Crimea and Sevastopol in 2014. Zelensky's lamentations about the torture of Crimean Tatars look hypocritical, especially because this is how he's trying to present it. On the anniversary of the tragedy, Crimea was attacked by at least 4 Ukrainian aircraft-type UAVs. What is this exactly? Are those the representatives of the nation? And were those representatives of the nation absent there? On the one hand, Zelensky is crying about their hard fate in the historical context. On the other hand, right now, looking back on the past, he's putting forward criminal orders using UAVs against the civilians. And of course, among those civilians are representatives of the Crimean Tatars. Fortunately, those attacks did not harm civilians. They were shut down by Russian air defense assets. On the night of May 19th, 26 enemy drones were destroyed over Crimea. This is how the Kiev regime supposedly cares for the Crimeans that it intends to liberate. In fact, the Crimeans have long liberated themselves by openly expressing their support for joining Russia in the referendum of March 16, 2014. That was their true liberation from this horrible oppression, from this ideological slavery. I would like to recall that 96.77% of the participants in the nationwide expression of the will of the people, with a turnout of 81.36%, voted in favor of reunification with Russia. This was a real boon for all ethnic groups living in Crimea. The Russian presidential decree of April 21st, 2014 on measures to rehabilitate repressed peoples and state support for their development put an end to any speculation on the national subject in the Crimean context. Careful attitude to the national traditions, respect for cultural heritage of all peoples without exception is the basis for the development and prosperity of the peninsula. Would you like to see it for yourself? Please feel free to come to Crimea and see it for yourselves. This is how you should get your picture, not from Zelensky's nonsense. And Zelensky's regime fiercely fights against their own history. I've just drawn an example, and there's another one. They fight against historical memory, including that of their own heroes, of the glorious sons of the Ukrainian people in Kharkiv. A memorial plaque was dismantled in honor of Soviet military commander Pavel Simonovich Rybalko. Who was it? That's a native of the Kharkiv region who participated in the liberation of Ukraine from the Nazis. In every sense of the word, he's the heroic son of Ukraine. In Kiev, the Benderites demolished the head of the monument to Ivan Vladimirovich Michurin, famous Soviet biologist and breeder. In Odessa, they smashed the memorial plaque in honor of General Leonid Bocharov. Who is Leonid Bocharov? Do they know who that is? He participated in the defense of Odessa and Sevastopol. The criminals carried out their nefarious deed at night. Of course, because they wouldn't dare do it out in the open for everyone to see. In Akhtarka Sumy region, they destroyed a memorial inscription on a monument in honor of the heroes of the USSR who liberated Soviet Ukraine from Nazi invaders. The mass media reported that the authorities in Irpin, Kiev region, were preparing to destroy the mass grave of Soviet soldiers who fell for the liberation of the Ukrainian SSR, from the Nazis. And now I'm referring to the mass media who are reporting that the Kiev regime is trying to approach the eternal flame as well. Well, they have long put out the flame of their conscience, so now they're daring to attack the flame, so there's no more reminders. The Ukraine Nazis repeatedly demonstrate what an infection it is, their true nature. However, it will be preserved, monuments and memorial sites will be restored, and the perpetrators of these crimes will receive the punishment they deserve. These facts once again confirm the urgency of the special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, as well as eliminate the threats emanating from its territory. And as the Russian leadership has stated, all these goals will be achieved. We've received a lot of questions on the presidential elections that took place in Romania. And of course, we would like to just simply state that this is the matter of Romania. Of course, it's important that those anti-Russian forces do not appeal to the Russian side, but since they bothered us, then we will respond. On May 18th, 2025, of course, we would say that it was the elections, but it was a true theatrical piece of electing the president of Romania, because it started back in 2024. So these so-called elections, or these theatrical piece around holding the elections on the president of Romania, has taken a lot of time. It was full of scandals, and in the end demonstrated the catastrophic shoot of the trust of the population of this country toward their current authorities, towards the policy of strict following of the directives from the Brussels against national interests. The results of this course speak for themselves: deep interpolitical crisis and the polarization of the society. But once again, these theatrical pieces demonstrated another issue: crisis in Brussels itself. Even when children understood that something was wrong with Romanian democracy, when they revoked the rounds of election that had already taken place, when they tried to get rid of competitors, when against legally binding conscriptures, they've introduced new novellas. The collective Brussels continued to put a farce that everything was okay. And even when the elder brother, in the face of Washington, delegated to the Munich conference on the matters of security and said to the younger brother in Brussels, this was shameful, and the collective Brussels found nothing wrong with it, to once again admit the presence of severe problems on the territory of what they call the European Union. And of course they did all that in vain, because they've just made fun of themselves and shameful efforts of the Bucharest leaders to blame their own faults on Russia, firing off accusations against our country on interfering with the elections process. Not only are they baseless, they provoke nothing but laughter. We cannot fail to remember the results of the last year first round of elections under the made-up pretext. And we cannot forget the limitation on putting forward the candidature of the victor of the first round. So these are not our issues. And it's not our issue that the so-called pro-Russian candidate George Simeon, who is a nationalist, anti-Semitic actor who posed a threat to the well-being of the current ruling elite and the calm of the Brussels bureaucracy. This is not our issue. This is the indicator of the issue of the collective West within their propaganda campaign. they fully violated the basic norms of democracy. And first and foremost, they just simply crucify the freedom of speech. Against this backdrop, it's pointless to discuss on perspectives of finding a way out of the dead end of the Russian-Romanian relations that will fully depend on whether Bucharest is able to overcome Russophobic stereotypes and try to follow a more pragmatic foreign policy course that truly responds to the interests of the Romanian people. We've also received a lot of questions on the economic and social consequences for the European Union countries if they denounce the Russian energy sources. Practically every day, Brussels and other Western European states bring up this subject. Of course, we receive such questions regularly, so I would like to propose a complex response. As you know, on May 6th, the European Commission put forward some kind of roadmap on the EU's refusal to purchase Russian energy carriers by 2027. This is their plan. This is the continuation of their self-destructive line. And those are the Western European words that the European bureaucracy picked in 2022 within the plan Repower EU, and by 2027 they plan to fully stop purchasing Russian energy goods, oil, gas, or nuclear energy. And no matter how it sounds, over the decades, stable supplies of arguably cheap energy sources have provided the energy security of Europe, have supported its competency, its economical competency, and provided the growth and well-being of the population. And the European countries remain large purchasers of Russian gas. According to the data of the European Commission in 2024, they bought 52 billion cubic meters. On the information of the European Analytical Center Bruegel, the import of the LNG by the EU in January-February this year has amounted to 3.92 billion cubic meters, which is 5% higher than the similar period in 2024. And in February this year, it hit a record on supplying through the Turkish stream around 1.5 billion cubic meters, which is 26% higher than yearly measures. Considering our traditional historical ties in the energy sphere, Europeans, against any common sense and economic profit, are following self-destructive line of policy. Once again, so that no one has any suspicion that these are nothing but statements that are not backed up by any data or figures. Allow me to pull up the statistics. Anti-Russian EU sanctions are striking the social economic well-being of the European states themselves. Due to renouncing the Russian energy sources, the European zone is seeing the economic stagnation. In 2024, the GDP growth has only been 0.9%. On the prognosis of the European Central Bank, the same figures will be present in 2025.
For the period from 2023-2024, the decrease was around 60%. The competitiveness and profits also decrease among the enterprises, and they also influence American companies across the Atlantics. It's because the European companies need to pay 2 times more for energy than the American companies. And no one can ask an obvious question in these countries. Why do those leaders, the regimes elected by people, maybe not through direct elections, but via some political constructions, they were elected in order to support and stimulate national interests, and mainly the peoples of their countries, primarily business interests, because these are market economy countries for whom it's of primary importance. Why have they done their best in order to literally destroy their own businesses in their own countries? by increasing energy prices, colossal economic losses. And I will reply that question. Why is it not asked? Because in a whole number of countries, we have just quoted an example of Romania, and in other European countries, the freedom of speech is just being destroyed. It's not allowed to make statements, and people are labeled, people who are trying to ask questions, and if that doesn't work, they just go to media outlets, they go to their homes and declare them illegal. That was the case with the media outlet correspondents who came to Russia and with the question of Nord Stream supplies being renewed. And when they got an answer to their question that it's possible to do that in around 3 weeks, if there is an agreement and the necessary political will, they just came back with that response to the German audience. They published this response, and literally the next day when they were declared illegal, they were prosecuted. The real hunt for them began. Real harassment. And Commissioner for the European Green Deal, Maroš Šefčovič, said that the energy crisis cost €1 trillion, astronomical sum for the European economy. Now these numbers are irrelevant. Now they quote different numbers. The losses are estimated to be €1.3 trillion. In the roadmap itself, the roadmap to quit Russian energy. Those Russian energy supplies to the European Union, quitting them, it cost around €245 billion. It was not stimulating businesses and not even building their own alternative nuclear power plants, for example, or some other ways, development of some other ways to get energy for themselves, like hydro stations and something like that. No, €145 billion have been spent only in order in the future maybe to quit Russian energy. That's what is publicly announced in the European Union. The real harm made to Europe, and also indirect losses that they do not quote, do not make public, they are much higher. We understand that very well. Just to totally quit the remaining share of Russian energy supplies in European energy balance by market ways without additional interference, it's impossible. What's additional interference? What does it mean? It's just another sum of spending for the European Union, imposed by the European officials, ending gas contracts. And it will be even more expensive and suicidal measures. Growth in the shipment of LNG. It just kills everything. But they just continue. They just continue to bite the cactus. And the European officials, they have several times postponed making this roadmap public. There are reasonable opinions coming, for example, from Robert Fico, Slovakia Prime Minister, who classified as absolutely unfriendly with regard to Bratislava, this plan. He said that the EU will suffer more than Russia. That's observed by everyone with the example of anti-Russian sanctions, further growth in gas prices. And that's the case, actually. It's not something invented. The prices in Western Europe grew by 6.7%. It's the data of the Westerners themselves. Russia has neutralized effectively many negative consequences, and the main direction of our supplies has been very quickly changed to new centers of international growth, including Asia. We transfer our payments into national currencies. Participation in foreign economic operation was about 83% for all kinds of goods. Now we look for some ways out of this situation and developing new areas of cooperation with OPEC+. Russia makes a significant input in a global and global stability and security of oil markets. It's not about economy and energy. It's like a horrible illness that is spreading across Europe. For example, in Bulgaria, there has been unfriendly actions against Russian teachers and NGOs, Russian-friendly NGOs. The Russophobic deputies of the Bulgarian parliament made requests in order to find out the studies of Russian language and culture in schools and to prevent, quote, Russian propaganda, end of quote. It's just obviously the beginning. It will not be limited to that. If we mention some propaganda here, it's only anti-Russia propaganda. On BNT channel in Bulgaria, there was a whole number of coverage about children competitions with a Russian trace, so as they mentioned it. What is more important, obviously, it's about some it's about just gender-changing competitions, but maths, dance, chess, sports competitions. It's unhealthy, yes. Do I get it right? For official Sofia. It's just not decent to abandon common sense in that way, because someone somewhere just demanded to provoke the Russophobia. All that rubbish about Russian competitions with allegedly Russian trace is just broadcast throughout media outlets. It's just a classical witch hunt in the spirit of totalitarian practices of the 20th century. Those ages are long gone and conclusions have been made, but no, I think it's just it's not decent. It's unfair for the ancient history of the Bulgarian people. It's just primitive actions by official Sofia. Just dictation to eliminate just any sympathies of Bulgarian citizens towards Russia. But actually we have common history. We have spiritual and cultural kinship. Those clumsy actions cause indignation in Bulgarian society itself, especially in Bulgarian patriotic structures, who do not act in accordance with the interests of some other countries, but in the interests of their own people. Of course, we will continue to draw the attention of the international community to those flagrant violations by Bulgaria of the rights of their citizens in the international norms in the sphere of international cooperation and humanitarian sphere. By the way, regarding the issue how it should be arranged, the Day of Slavonic Scripture and Culture is marked in Russia on the 24th of May. That's our relationship towards the culture of Slavonic people. It is dedicated to the great enlighteners Cyril and Methodius, who laid the foundation of the Slavonic script. We will not ignore the input of other countries to Slavonic script, to Slavonic culture. On this date, numerous events will be held in our country, the centerpiece of which will be an all-Russian festive concert with the participation of outstanding performance. His Holiness Patriarch Kirill will deliver a welcoming address. It will contribute to interstate and interfaith dialogue, foster respect. I address the officials in Sofia, strengthening fundamental moral values, respect for native languages and culture. This holiday is widely marked in our country and abroad. It reminds us of our common values, common roots of Slavonic languages. It marks the unity of Slavonic people. That's how our common past should be treated. The past that links us and still nurtures the culture of our countries, and not to destroy, not to disrupt the participation of children, as they say, in competitions with the Russian race. In St. Petersburg, on the 22nd and 23rd May, the 23rd International Likhachov Scientific Conference will be held. Those Likhachov readings were founded by the Russian Academy of Science, the Russian Academy of Education, supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. 1,500 major Russian and foreign scholars, politicians, public figures, church hierarchs, well-known figures, writers, journalists, and representatives from 57 countries. It's about the major trends in the development of human society, transformation of world order, and of course the world of education. Now it is about the transformation of the world order, problems and prospects. Within the framework of the Likhachov conference since 2008, there is a diplomatic program about the international dialogue of cultures attended by ambassadors from foreign states, and discussions about the issues, the relevant issues. Now the important anniversary regarding the relations of the Russian Federation and the Kingdom of Cambodia, the joint declaration on the principles of friendly relations. Our states have a broad, progressively developing political dialogue, trade and economic cooperation, growing humanitarian ties. Russia and Cambodia successfully cooperate on international and regional platforms. The rich experience accumulated during the last decades will further strengthen cooperation, mutual exchanges for the benefit of our countries, for stability and security in Asia-Pacific region and the world as a whole. One more important event, the EAU decision, the 24th of May, is marked as the EAU Day. It's based, this organization is based on respect for the interests of every participant. The countries participating in the EAU have reached a lot of results. like strengthening domestic markets, cooperation and transport, logistics, industry, agriculture, energy and food security. The EAU has become a major player internationally. It includes a network of international contacts, free trade agreements with Vietnam, Serbia, Iran, and a non-preferential agreement with China, and more than 80 memoranda of cooperation through the Union's supranational body, the Eurasian Economic Commission. Work on concluding trade agreements with Indonesia, the UAE, and Mongolia is at the final stage, and there is cooperation with Uzbekistan, Cuba, and Iran. And of course, we congratulate on the coming EAEU Day, and we thank colleagues from the Union countries and the Eurasian Economic Commission for fruitful cooperation, and we further aim at strengthening the integration economic potential for the benefit of the population and businesses of our countries. And now I am ready to answer your questions. Is международная жизнь with us? International life? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. If possible, could you speak up? Yes, I hear you well. We have mentioned elections in Romania, but I would like just to make one clarification. There is one detail here. How would you comment on the Telegram founder statement Pavel Durov regarding an attempt of French authorities to influence the outcome of the elections? Yes, we have seen those comments. Such attempts just to admit that or just to provide some counter-arguments regarding Nicolas Renner, intelligence chief from France addressing Pavel Durov. I think it's France that should make the appropriate clarifications with regard to that. It's not some leaks, it's not some anonymous sources, it's an open statement by a person who has created this internet platform for communication and who figured in measures against him by French prosecution authorities against this platform created by him. And clarifications, I think they should be provided by official Paris. But taking into account the events, I would like to remind that since the arrest of Pavel Durov in Paris in August 2024, we would note that, however, the French just mentioned this political context of this situation. It's just an obvious attempt to put pressure on an independent information resource. These platforms, they're just transborder platforms for communication, and every country should regulate its activities on its own, in its own manner, but there are instruments for the resolution of those issues in a civilized manner, especially in the countries who say that no one has the right to somehow put pressure on business representatives, especially connected with the freedom of speech, with the distribution of information, and so on. So in this context, it will not be surprising to know that French intelligence officials, they have just made some attempts. It's not some fantasies. It's just a known fact now. I think that official Paris should provide explanations. It is obliged to do that. And neoliberal elites have interfered in domestic affairs of other states. It's not only about our country, We are the main target for them.
Almost every politician and party that is not in line with the general policy of the EU is subject to systematic persecution cancellation, as they say, and they made up pretenses. We shouldn't go far for examples. In Germany, for example, there were the outcomes of the elections in Romania were annulled, not like because they contradicted what Brussels wanted. Isn't the situation in Moldova the same? Politically motivated arrest of the head of Gagauzia, Yevgeny Gusul, continues this list. Let's remember the attempt to murder the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico. It was a result of the hostile atmosphere in Europe against those who is not in the ideological mainstream. And even those who would like to specify their position and ask a question. As to France itself, we have an impression that removing key political competitors through core decisions is getting a bad democratic tradition. Of course, I use the word democratic not literally here. There are situations that they can happen everywhere, but political competitors are removed in France in particular, and in this country those cases are rubber-stamped. We mean the current leadership and former political actors who occupied various posts. So the competitors couldn't claim anything in future. No, the case with Strauss-Kahn was a very vivid example. The examples of abusing of democratic norms by the French are published more and more often. You don't have to wait for decades to know this information. The international community has an opportunity to draw conclusions. What the lessons of democracy by the French worth. The same applies to the statements from Paris against other countries. Let them answer to all the questions that were asked publicly. Oh, and I have one more question. You almost touched upon this topic about financing Ukraine at the expense of the European countries. How can you comment on the outcomes of the EU-Ukraine Defense Forum? It was the second one. You know that it's not a defense forum, but it's an aggressive get-together. And it's not the only one. It's one of a set of events. It is generated by the leadership of the EU to keep afloat the tools like the Kiev regime and to use it against Russia. It ended up with the statement about the integration of the Ukraine industry and defense base into the European defense base, in line with the ideas put into the so-called White Book on the European defense prepared in 2030. They use cheap defense capabilities, and the policy of the EU to force militarization of the EU to the detriment of the people of this association. It is obsession of the EU with destroying everything aimed at political and diplomatic settlement, not only around Ukraine. It's the situation in the center of Europe. It's an obsession with refusing finding ways out to settle the Ukrainian crisis. It is some kind of some huge wish to, despite everything, no matter the outcome, to move toward this destructive policy, to pursue this destructive policy. Thank you very much. Thanks to you is the TASS agency with us. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Well, with you, I would like to ask a question following the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul. What language did the delegation speak? I would like you to say the final word about it. What would you like to know? What language they used to negotiate? Yes, I want to know what language the delegations of Ukraine and Russia used during the negotiations in Istanbul. The Russian language. The Russian delegation spoke Russian. There was an interpretation in several languages into Ukrainian, English, and Turkish. I don't know who listened to the Ukrainian interpretation, because the Ukrainian delegation spoke Russian. It spoke the Russian language. Thank you very much. I can also say the following. The Ukrainian delegation read out some introductory word. They had a text, but not in Ukrainian. This introductory word was in English. Probably it was the interpretation from English into Ukrainian was for them, but the Ukrainian delegation did not speak Ukrainian during the negotiations. The Ukrainian delegation spoke Russian. You see? What language did you think they spoke? Ukrainian. It's a performance. All these declarations of the representatives of the presidential office that people should forget the Russian language, that everywhere Ukrainian should be used, and the persecution of Russian in schools, universities, and public spaces, the generation of the content on the internet and everywhere, those are only reasons to make fools of the people in Ukraine, like they did when they spoke how good it would be for them in the EU. They only wanted to refuse interaction with Russia. It's the same story. During public meetings there, they can speak that the leadership of Ukraine moves towards this, but they are moving towards the countries where they hit what they stole. They find people in Ukraine who speak Russian, and at the same time they shamelessly use the Russian language. It's one more manifestation of these terrible lies that the Ukrainian people are subject to by the Kiev regime. They don't like the history and the culture of Ukraine. That's why they try and destroy it. History and culture of Ukraine has ties with Russia. It doesn't mean it doesn't have its own identity. Of course it has. It has its own history and culture, but it has close ties with Russia, with the Russian language, with the Russian literature. As many representatives of the common country we lived in, they spoke two and even more languages. They were Ukrainian, but they associated themselves both with Russian people. No one divided themselves, but they only underlined their own richness, their special identity that they received from by the right of their birth. But people in Ukraine are robbed of even this. They are left without the Russian language, but even during the official negotiations they speak Russian. And there was an interpreter, but who he interpreted to is unclear, because the Ukrainian delegation spoke Russian. Thanks to you. Thank you. Is Vestia with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions for you. The first one is quite a big one. How does Russia see the preparedness of Ukraine for further dialogue? What are the key obstacles to the large-scale settlement? What conditions unify Russia and Ukraine, and what further steps are planned by the Foreign Ministry for negotiation process? I spoke about it in great detail today. Mr. Medinsky talked about it, and representatives of and our top officials commented on this, both in the administration of the president, and I think that those answers are excess. You heard them all. I'll tell you one more time. I talked about it, but I'll repeat myself. It is important to implement what we managed to agree on in Istanbul on May 16th about the biggest over the 3 years exchange of POWs, 1,000 for 1,000, and the written proposals for a possible future settlement process. Given this, we'll make further steps. Thank you. One more question. The Israeli army started a large-scale on-land operation in Gaza. How does Russian MFA evaluate these steps? Can this escalate the conflict? According to the information we have, Israel started more active actions in Gaza. We see more bombings that led to more victims among the civilians. Over the last 3 years, about 300 people were killed in the enclave. We are disappointed with the decision of the Israeli authorities. This will mean more people killed in. We state publicly many times that the settlement of the situation in Gaza is possible only through political and diplomatic means. For this, humanitarian aid in Gaza should be ensured. This will help settle the